recording and I'll start share my screen with you guys. Let me know if there's any issues. It's on the lowest quality they can go. Hopefully the Unify will keep up, make it a nice experience for everyone. Alright, so let's get started. So today we'll be learning about HTML, CSS and JavaScript. They're the most basic tools we use to build websites. This is going to be just a very introductory workshop, just to introduce you guys to the basics of all the technologies. You're not going to know everything after this workshop, but it's a good place to start. So as friends mentioned the other day, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript have their own different job when it comes to creating web pages. HTML is responsible for creating the content and the structure of the web page, but CSS is responsible for giving the web page style and changing the appearance, and then JavaScript provides the functionality to a web page. This famous picture makes its return. So HTML. HTML is a hypertext markup language and is used to structure a web page. The general structure of the web page is seen below. Here we have the HTML tags, and in it is all our content. The head is where we have our title, which is displayed at the top. Let me just at the top of our tabs here. The body contains all the content, such as your headings and your paragraphs, but we'll learn about them a bit later on. And here they are. So, a web page is made up of elements, each with their own properties that contain content to be displayed on the web page. So as you see here with heading and paragraph, for example. And these elements are defined by tags. Most elements have open and closed tabs, which is this H1, and then it closes with the slash at the very start of the tag. And it's a container. All the content within that container makes up an element. The most notable and the tag you'll use the most is the div tag, and that just helps us define a division or section within the document. So like here, for example, this div element is concerns itself with the heading and the title of this web page. This div here concerns itself with the entirety of this chapter 1 that we have going on, and this smaller div concerns itself with the text of chapter 1. And it's just used to help us separate our page easy for us to see. If you want to see the full list of different elements, you can just click here and it will take you to the docs page for that. Now, as you mentioned, that all elements have special properties, and these properties are called attributes. So they attributes change the element in one way or another. The most common attributes of an element is their class or ID, and this is used to specify or group elements. So class is used to group a bunch of elements together, so many elements could be of the same class, and that class has certain features or a certain style needs to be applied to them, for example. Whereas ID is an attribute that is used to uniquely identify an element in the document tree. Like I said here, it's used it has to be exclusive, and it's mostly used for exclusively applying style or exclusively manipulating it with using JavaScript. And that's how these attributes are applied in code. So you have your element tag, and then within the two open and closed, greater than and less than signs, you apply your attribute. So here we have an attribute of style, and all we do is we write equals, and then we write what the value of that attribute will be. So in this case, style has a background color of red. That's more CSS, but we'll get to that later. This div is part of the class big section, and it's, as you can see, the value is contained within these quotation marks here. And the same for this paragraph, has an ID of first. Images in HTML are added using the img element tag, and it can also be used to add GIFs. So for example here, this lovely photo of 3 dog mermaids is added in with this piece of code here. So an image has two special attributes that we are most concerned with, and that is the source and the alt. Alt is optional, but source is the one we really care about. So the source attribute specifies the location of the image. So this can be either a URL, whether it's a photo from the internet, or it's the path of where the image lies in the site's directory. And alt is an optional attribute, and it contains a text description of the image. It's used for accessibility, and also if the image doesn't load, that alt text, which is here, will be in place of this lovely dog image. Anchors and hyperlinks in HTML are done using this A or anchor element, and they work similar to the image element at the top here. So what you have inside of your anchor tag, you have this href attribute, which again is the link to where you want to go. So for example, if you want to go to an external site, simply include the URL that you wish to visit. If you want to go to a different page within the same website, then you include the path, the relative path in the web's directory to that page. So for example, if we want to go to our page called index.html, we simply write the path. So one back a directory, index.html. That's the next page we want to visit. If we want to visit a different section on the same page, we use this hashtag and the ID of the section we want to go to. So here, name of section is just an ID of the element we want to visit, and we can specify the ID and just write it into a button. This target attribute, as you can see here, specifies whether the link is to be opened in the same tab or a different one. So by including this blank, we tell the browser that, hey, we want to open the link in another tab. Download is another attribute we can give to hyperlinks, and that just tells the page that we want to download the resource that we're linking to. If you want to name the resource that you're linking to, so for example, if I want people to download a file, I can give downloader values. I can write download equals and then the name of the file that I want it to be called. Otherwise, I can just leave it blank and it will download the file anyway. Always be careful when clicking links. You never know when those cheeky buggers will do something they shouldn't. So images and hyperlinks, or hyperanchors and anything can mix in HTML. All you need to do is simply enclose whatever it is inside of these anchor tags, and they will become a hyperlink. So here, for example, this bit of code gives me a photo from the Codes for Causes. Now, if I click on that photo, it will take me to the Codes for Causes webpage. And that's just how it's done, just like that. Another important part of HTML is forms. So these are used to collect user input. I'm sure you guys have filled them out many times. And they're defined using these form tags. Inside the form, you usually have your inputs and other things such as text boxes. We'll get to those a bit later on. The inputs can come in different forms such as text boxes, radio buttons, checkboxes, and they all do things a little bit differently. And then once you're done to post or submit your form, you add this input of type submit, and that will say, hey, I'm ready to send my information off. Form has this attribute action, which specifies where we're going after the form has been submitted. So if it's blank like this, that means we're just staying on the same page. Otherwise, it's a link to another page to say, thank you for submitting this form, or something like that. And these buttons can be changed. So radio buttons, you can have checkboxes, all sorts of different input types. And those different input types can help us with input validation. So for example, here we have an input type email. That's telling the website that, hey, we're expecting an email here. And HTML will do the website will do a bit of input validation for us. It's not perfect. It's very minimal, but at least we'll get an email out of it at the end of the day. Whether that email is correct or not, we have to do that. And this just deals with garbage inputs. So you can have email, you can have number, you can have telephone, stuff like that, or date even for date time, and that's just the type here. Now, all those elements in our HTML document create this document object model, which is how the documents are laid out, and it's in a tree form. So it looks something like this. So here we have our document, here's our HTML, and then we have our head. Inside the head, we contain the title and some text, my title. Then we have the body. Inside the body, we have this element A, which produces, has an attribute of href something. And then inside that element is a text, and so on. So that's how the HTML document is built. We can use the DOM to then access and dynamically change parts of it in the JavaScript or any language we wish. So the DOM is a platform and a language neutral interface, meaning anything can access it, anything can use it. And then each element is the node, as I mentioned earlier, and we can change that using the JavaScript, for example. Alright, now moving on to CSS. So CSS is your cascading style sheets, and they provide the style to the web. They usually specify the layout and style and the look of the web page, and they tell the browser how to display the elements. So simple CSS can be written directly into an element. So for here, we have our body element, and we're using inline CSS, where we set the attribute style to whatever our CSS wants to be. So in this case, we're setting it to the background color of red. However, using inline CSS is hard to manage and maintain, especially when we have a large page with many elements in it. So for that, we use this document level style sheets or external style sheets to help us combat this issue. But first, we must know how to create these style sheets. So the general format of CSS is we have selector, and that's just a list of values that specify the elements that we want to apply this certain style to, and there's certain rules for how we can specify what we want to select, but we'll get to that a bit later on. The attribute is the property of the element we wish to change. So for example, some attributes include your background color of the element, the font size, or the width. And then the effect is what we set the attribute to. So we can have a width of 50%, or we can have a background color red, font size 16, etc. And they've come in this format here. So we have the selector here, and our attributes, these ones, and our effects are here. To separate them, it's just a semicolon at the end, and they're included in braces. So this bit of code here is just used to center an image and make it 50 pixels in width. You might be wondering, how do I know what attributes exist? Well, there's two ways we can figure this out. One of them is to just simply Google it. For example, this bit of code here comes from Googling how to center an image. You're not going to know everything. There's plenty of resources out there. So just Google it. It will take 2 seconds. Chances are your solution already exists. Second way is to play around with it. So learn what attributes exist, learn how you can change them, what their effects are, and then play around with it until you produce something that you like, pretty much with anything. Now with selection, we can... Oh, it's a bit stuffed up, it's alright. We can do different things to select different elements or different classes of elements, for example. So if we want to select all elements of body in this case, which is not a great example, but we simply include the element type at the start for our braces and include the style at the end. Inside, sorry. For classes, it's a little bit different. So what you do is you have this full stop that's preceding the class name. So here we have a class narrow, and we're going to apply the style to it. So we have this full stop and the class name coming after. Attribute and effect is the same. If we want to specify the type of element and the class, that's simple. So before the full stop, we simply add the element type plus the class name to specify that, hey, we want to apply this style here to all paragraphs of the class narrow. IDs is another way we can apply our styles by. So we simply, that's through the hashtag. It's simply hashtag and then the ID of whatever you want. So in this case, we have an ID big button, and we want to apply the style to that element. Pseudo classes are just styles that apply when a certain action or condition is met, and it does not apply all the time. So for example, some pseudo classes include hover or focus and active. So hover, obviously when you hover over an object, it will apply that style. So in this case here, for pseudo classes, we simply add a semicolon in between what we want to apply the pseudo class to. So here, for every button element, we want to apply this. When it's hovered, we want to apply this style to it. And the full list of pseudo classes can be found here, and the definitions as well. If we want to specify a large group of elements that we want to apply this style to, we simply just list them, delimited by a comma. So here, if we want to apply the style to h1, h2, and divs, then we simply separate them by a comma and do the style as we normally would. There are other rules for selecting and specifying what elements you want to apply certain styles to, but we'll leave those as self-learning because there's a lot of them and they do get very specific. A starting point is you can contextual selectors, and they just group elements based on their position. So for example, we can group this specific one by saying, hey, we want to apply the style to all paragraphs that come directly after a paragraph inside a div, for example. But that's getting too complex for us. Okay, now that we know what we're doing with CSS and how to create it, let's actually write some down. So there's two ways we can manage CSS better than inline style comments. And the first one is your document style sheets, and they're located within the head of a HTML document. Same rules apply as above, simply just include it inside these style tags, and then it will apply to the whole document, and the styling is the same as what we saw before. Now, that's all well and good, but what if we have many different HTML pages and we have to copy over and put it in the different heads of the different HTML pages? It just gets a bit out of control. So for that, we use external style sheets, and they're just separate .css files that hold all our styles, and we can simply reference these CSS files in our HTML document for ease of use. So here we have our styles.css file, and it holds a style for body and paragraphs, for example. If we want to apply that to our HTML code, we simply have this link element included in the head of our HTML document, and that just references the style sheet location. So this could be again in your web directory, or if you're using things like Bootstrap, it'll just be a URL to where the style is located, and then that will apply to your document. Alrighty, so we can style and give a color to some of our elements, but now we need to know how to position them. And flex boxes are a great way to position our items within a container. So I could just teach you about it, or I could show you this excellent resource online called Flexbox Froggy that teaches you all about flexboxes one step at a time. The aim is to get this frog onto this lily pad just by changing the CSS of this pond ID attribute here. So for example here, to move it to the end, we read through this. So we use justify content to move items horizontally in this case. So we do that. Just making sure I don't spell anything wrong. And we can select some of the options here: flex start, left side, right side, etc. In this case, we want it to go to the end. And hey, away we go. We did it. Here, again, we can go through and read. It's quite obviously that we want to center these. So simply make sure I spell center right here. There we are. And it goes through. There's 24 levels, and they just introduce new content such as aligning items. Here, you can also have flex direction and some good stuff like that. Your order, wrapping, for example. But we'll leave those for you guys to do. It's a good 15-20 minute fun. And see if you can get all the way to level 24 and complete that. Make it a speed run. Okay, now we'll get into JavaScript. So JavaScript gives a web page functionality and reactiveness. It allows the user to react to the web page and make it, and we can use JavaScript to make the website do cool things. Similar to CSS, we can implement an HTML document by encapsulating it in a script tag within the head of the document. So we write all our JavaScript within the HTML document, but that's a bit of work. And again, not very manageable. So we'll stick to using external JavaScript files. And to reference them, we simply add this script tag, where source is the location of the JavaScript file we want to use. And that can be included in the head or the body of the HTML document. The differences between including in the head and the body we'll just leave for now, but you can read up on that if you'd like. Alright, now the basics of JavaScript. So again, it's very much introductory. There's a lot of cool things you can do in JavaScript that help you out, such as like the ternary operator that helps out with if and else, but we'll leave those for now. Just go through the basics and you can learn more on the way. So variables. There are three keywords we use to declare variables in JavaScript. Them being this var, let, and const. All of them giving our variables different properties. So, for example, this var keyword allows the variable to be redeclared later on, and the variable has global scope. So what that means is if I declare my variable x on line 3, I can then redeclare it using var x on line 10, and there'll be no problem. And global scope means I can just access that variable that's been defined by var anywhere within the file. Let is does not let you redeclare your file, so if your variable. So if you say let x equal something on line 2, you can't then say var x or let x on line 10. You can change the value, but you just can't redeclare the variable. And let variables also have box scope. So for example, if I declare a variable within a function, then I can only use it within that function. I can't use it outside of the function or a different function, unless I pass it to it, of course. But yeah, I can only use it within that block of code, hence block scope. And this constant keyword means that once the variable has been declared and assigned, it cannot be redeclared, and the value never changes. Sort of. It never changes for data types such as numbers and strings. When you have arrays, you can change the things within the array, but we won't get into that for now. Just think of that as a variable that doesn't change. And it too has block scope, same as your let. For the full explanation on these, check. I've added a link to the W3 Schools page for it, and they go into detail the differences of const, let, and var. So the different data types in JS, the two types are your primitive and your structural data types. So a primitive is just a data type that is not an object and has no methods. So for example, strings, numbers, big integers, undefined, null, and symbol are your primitives, and they are not objects. But structural data types like objects and functions are objects, and they have their own methods. We'll quickly go through math and logic. So again, math just works very similar. Your plus, your minus, your multiplication, division, the modular operator, which does your remainder, and then your double asterisk, which does the exponent. So 2 to the power of 3, for example. These are your logical operations in JavaScript. Your double ampersand for and. These two straight lines for or, exclamation mark for not. Then you have your greater than equal to, which I'm sure you guys know what they do. And then in JavaScript you have these equal to and exactly equal to, which operate slightly differently to each other. So this equal to will check if the value is the same. So for example here, if I have this 2 that is a string, JavaScript will interpret that as a number as well and tell me that it's equal to this 2 that's written as an integer. But if I do that same thing with the exactly equal to, it will tell me that it's false because they are not the same data type. Now this 2 is written as a string, this 2 is written as a number. They are not exactly the same, even though their values are the same. So a lot of things. So simply writing 9 exactly equal to 9, that'll give me false. Whereas if I write 9 equals to 9, that's true, for example. And you can have a play around with that with a bit of fun, seeing all the quirky stuff in Java, such as JavaScript, such as your not a number. Your not a number is a number. Fantastic, right? But also, if I wrote not a number is exactly equal to not a number, it's false. So, brilliant. Anyway, your arrays in JavaScript are just ordered lists of values, and their index starts at 0. So, for example, here we have this my array that holds A, B, C, yada yada yada. To index them, simply add these square brackets and then the number of the index that we want to get from the array. So 0 will get me A, and 4 will get me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 will get me 2. Objects in JavaScript are just variables that hold more than one value. You can see one in the previous example here, which is now down here. Oh, sorry, I'm just checking to make sure no one is typing in the chat. And basically, an object is similar to a dictionary in Python, where they hold key and value pairs. So functions can be objects as well, but just for this purpose here, we have this key name and this value Jared. There's a key again, key value, and then to access a key in an object, we simply write the object name or the variable name of the object, this full stop, and then the key we wish to access. So if we want to return this person's age, we simply go person dot age, and that will give us this value here. Alright, functions are just blocks of code designed to do a particular task. The function syntax in JavaScript to define a function is as follows. So we can do function as your keyword, give the function a name, include the parameters separated by a comma, and then our code goes here. In JavaScript, we can store functions in variables. So take this function here, for example. We have some function, no name, which is acceptable in JavaScript. It's called an anonymous function, and it just takes 2 parameters. And then to call that function, we simply do func name. So the function name just goes from here to here. Thanks, Larry, for joining. And to call a function, we simply add these open close brackets and our parameters in the inside. Now, in JavaScript, we have these things called arrow functions, which just help write functions a bit more compactly. So, for example, they work by removing the function keyword and even the return keyword in some cases. and they lead with their parameters. So this function that I have here, add xy with parameters x and y, will return this value x plus y. Very neat. If I was to turn this into an arrow function, I could simply store the function in a variable in add xy equals, and then this is the start of my arrow function here. So I lead with my parameters, do this little equals and greater than to draw a little arrow, and then I have my block of code that I want the function to do. When functions are one-lined or single line like the one here, we don't need the braces that you can see here, or the return statement, just as they're implied. However, if it's a bigger function like the one below, where we have multiple lines of processing, the braces and the return function must return in our definition. So again, we assign our arrow function to a variable, add 10, lead with our parameters, it's arrow, then our block of code. Alright, loops. Now, loops in JavaScript worked pretty similar to loops elsewhere. You have your for loop, which is simply for your starting point, the condition you will loop until you meet, or until it's no longer true, and your increment. So here, we're starting off with this. Oh, that's wrong. I've written this in Java, but oh well. So pretend that's let I equals 0, and that's our starting point, and we'll go until we'll go while I is less than 10. And after each loop, we will increment pretty standard stuff. The for in loop will iterate over the indexes. So if I have an array here with values 2, 4, 6, and I iterate, I do a for in, it will give me the indexes. So it will give me 0, 1, 2. If I want the values stored within the array, then I do a for of loop. So I go for, assign a variable, in here it's k, of my array, and then I will get the values 2, 4, and 6. So a bit different. While loops are called pretest loops, where the condition is tested before the loop is ran, and the condition is simply included within these brackets here. So pretest just means the condition is tested before anything runs, whereas the opposite is do while loops, and do while loops will run guaranteed once, and they're known as post-test. They run guaranteed once because the test is done at the end of the loop. So for example, here we have do this bit of code, then we check whether the condition is true. So for example here, we have while b is less than 3, we will run this and it will increment every time. Therefore it runs 1, 2, 3 times, for the times it's less than 3. In this do while loop, however, we have 0 and our condition is that b is greater than 10. So the loop will run once, test and see that this condition is false, then exit the loop, hence it only runs once. If we want to break out the loop, we use these break and continue keywords, and break leaves the loop completely. So no longer doing this loop, I'm leaving. Whereas continue is a bit more lenient, and it will no longer run the current iteration, it will just go straight to the next one. So if I have this break statement, leaves it completely, but if I'm looping through 1 to 10 and I have this continue, and for some reason I need to continue on 3, it will simply stop all the execution for that number 3 loop and go on to the 4th loop, for example. Alrighty, that is all for our little introduction here. So for the demo part of this workshop, we're going to be creating a little Pokemon API web app, which simply just calls the Pokemon API and displays the image that we want on screen. And we'll be using the Pokey API, which you can find just by PokeAPI.co, and it'll tell you what you're receiving. Alrighty, so if we start up our page, First of all, we need to create an HTML document to give our web page some structure, so we'll just call that index.html. A little tip, if you type doc and then tab, it'll set it up for you straight away. You don't have to type any of the extra stuff.
Phil, can you zoom in a little bit?
Yep, I was just about to ask.
Cheers.
Is that better?
Yes, thanks.
No worries, man. Okay. When we're creating our web document, we want to see what we're creating while we're creating it. So for that, we have on VS Code, there is an extension called Live Server, which you can download this one, and that will help you. It will produce a live server, and you can see what you're doing. To do that, to start a live server, you can go Control-Shift-P, live server, open with live server once you have it done, and that will open this your browser, and then you can code next to your browser. I'll just zoom out a little bit here. Is this still good to see? I just there. Is this all right?
Yeah, that's good.
Alrighty. So let's get started on our page. So the first thing, we'll give our document a title, and we'll call this our Pokedex, for example. And this will just, you'll see as I save it, it'll just show up on top of the screen. There's our change. That's what title does. Alright, in our body, we want to, let's create a title for the page or a thing to display at the top. And we'll call this, we'll give this our class header. And then inside of our header, we'll just have a heading. Call this, give this an ID of title, just so we can manage it later on. And we'll go, welcome to our Pokedex. Just for aesthetics, we'll add this little HR, which just draws a line across the page at the top. Fantastic. Now that's done, we need to add somewhere we can actually, select the Pokemon we want and then see the Pokemon. So for that, we will create a new div, and we're gonna have two boxes. So we'll create one box and another one of the same class. So this will be our input, and this will be our output section. But it's not great. We can't really see our boxes yet because there's nothing there. This is where CSS comes in. So we'll create our styles.css file, and now we can start giving our web page a bit of color, a bit of style to it. So for example, if we want to do the background at the very start, we'll do it in a pretty Pokemon color. I've got the Pikachu yellow for us today that we'll use as the backdrop. And if I save it, nothing happens. Why? Well, because we haven't referenced it in our HTML document yet. To do this, we need to add that. If we go back to our workshop page, we can see when we go to CSS how we can add this in. And it's just simply the link and the link element and the href to the style page. So we'll use that. We'll just straight copy and paste it in because it works in our case. And now we save that. Let me grab my browser up quickly. Now once we save that, we can see our page has turned to yellow, which is great because now we can start messing around with our header and our boxes that are soon to be. So, for example, with our header, because we've assigned it a class header, as you can see here, we use that full stop and class name to initiate our style. Now we want to, this is telling the code that, hey, we want our classes of type header to have this style. So we'll give this, let's center this, for example, make it look nice. If when you complete the Flexbox Froggy game, you would realize that you're going to use one of these align items to center and position your elements around. So in this case, I want to use the align items. And thankfully, with VS Code, they give you some hints. So you can, here's the different things the different values you can put to your attribute align items. But for us, we just want to center it. Let's save. Let me just bring up my thing again. We save it. Oh, it is. Oh, it's a bit odd.
Do you need to specify display flags first?
Yeah, you do. You're right. My bad. I was supposed to do that, but it's alright. Doesn't work. Oh well. That's okay. I think we can do this. Nope.
Oh, I think it's
Oh,
just
this is the header.
a
So
line. Yeah, that's the
this is the header. So it's my bad. That's just fine. When it comes to title, though, yeah, like I mentioned, we need to do the display type of flex, and here we can use justify content. That's the one the attribute that positions our content horizontally until we change the flex direction to be column. But for now, we don't need to worry about that. So we justify content to move it horizontally, and now we can center it. As you can see, it is centered here. We can do a few more things with our title, so we can change the font size if we wish. So let's make it, say, 36 pixels, or the tiniest difference, but a bit bigger. And then we'll just change the color of it as well. So we can start typing, and then VS Code will give us some examples of what we can pick. We'll go with this dark slate gray over here, for example. Looks nice. We can even do some on the elements. So for our HR, which is this line across here, we can change its color to, if I spell it right, change its color to red, and we can make it go across the screen 80%, for example. Bang. Now that we have our boxes defined here, we want to actually see something. So for that, again, dot box, because it's a class, we will set its background color so we can see it to just regular gray. Make sure to spell it incorrectly, otherwise it won't know what you're talking about. And then we can give the box a width. So let's say we have a width of our box of 400 pixels and a height of 400 pixels. And that box looks a bit square, for example. So we can give it some rounded edges with the border radius attribute. And we'll give it a radius of about 100 pixels. Now our two boxes are squared off, as you can see. Nothing on Discord. Cool. Yeah. So now they have nice and square, rounded at the edges. We can give them a border just to see where they are. So for example, we can give them a 3-pixel border of a solid line, and we'll make it black. So now you can see the border of these rounded squares. Another few important attributes to add is padding, and you can see the effect here. It just makes it a bit thicker. And also margin, 10 pixels, and this will give it that leeway, so they're not directly next to each other. Perfect. So we can go back to our HTML now. So this div here is where all the content is. So now we can give it a class content. So we can now use CSS to align these squares to be next to each other. So, for example, to do that, we again do .content, and we use flexboxes again. Display flex is how to start off and tell it that you want to use a flexbox. And to make them next to each other but have space around, we use justify content, space around them in this case. It doesn't look pretty when it's like that, but when it's a full page, it looks a bit nicer. This is only for demonstration purposes, that they're so squished. But once you have it on a separate page, it looks all nice. And this space around means that there is obviously space around them. If we wanted to do space between, is another option we can do. And that means there's a bigger space in between them, as opposed to the sides. But in our case, we'll use space around just because it looks a bit nicer. Ugh, excuse me. And now we want to start adding in our forms, because we want to be able to select what Pokemon we want to display. So to do this, we'll add another div within the first box, and this will be where the form is, so we can give it a class of form. And we'll just write something nice. So give it a H3 for smaller text, and just like a welcome to the Pokedex, another intro. Repeated, but it's fine. And we can say what we're going to do. So we'll include a paragraph, and we'll just specify here we can search for your favorite Pokemon. Oop. And display it to you. Fantastic. Now we'll create the actual form. So to do this, we use the form tag. We'll give it an ID Pokey form, so that we can reference it later when we deal with the submissions. Just check and make sure I'm not running too fast. Yep, that's cool. Alrighty. And then we need some inputs in this form. So let's do that. Let's add another div for our inputs, just to separate them. Don't need to give these a name. And then we want an input of type text, if we get people to type in the Pokemon that they want. And it needs an ID, so we can deal with it in processing of Pokename. And then this can just be like that, for example. And now we have a text input, but it looks a bit bland, so we can add this attribute placeholder and simply write a placeholder for what we want. So for example, if we want to search Pikachu, we can give them an example. We want to search Pokemon, so we can give them an example for Pikachu. And now there's a little placeholder for us. Pretty neat. Still, we don't know what this input is for, So we can add a label. And to add this label, what you need to do is you need to say what it's for. So label for, then the ID of the input, so Pokey name. Whoops, forgot the equals. And VS Code will automatically generate the end tags for you, which is nice. And this is simply just the Pokemon's name that we want to input. Bank. There we are. Now we can do our submit button. Just below, we'll do another div for it. And its submit buttons are of type submit. And the value that we want to display, value is the attribute that is basically the text to display on the button. So for example, I could write hey. There's a button hey. But a more relevant is we'll use a Pokemon term, catch that Pokemon. Whoops, what did I do? Wrong button. There we are. And that's all well and good. But what if we want to make the form look a bit nicer? We'll save that. So what we can do, since we have this class form here, we can make it a little bit nicer. So if you want to know how big the area your element is taking up, you can simply just add a border of 3 pixels and blue, and that's where our form is currently located, that box there. So now we know that, we can move it around a bit easier as we know the entire perimeter of it. So now if we want to move it around, we make it a flex box again. Flex direction, we want it to, let's say we want everything to go from bottom to top. So we write flex direction and then column, which it won't change much on our screen, but if we got rid of it, you can see that it's a bit mushed up, but because our thing was like this, it's a bit different. Anyway, let's make it go from top to bottom. So our flex direction is column. And there we are. Let's put it in the middle of our little box here, and that's using justify content, which aligns it again horizontally left. Oh, in this case, because we've selected the direction to be a column, we now deal with the vertical. So justify content now deals with the up and down. So let's make that in the center. We have a pretty small area for our box, and we want it to take up a little bit more so we can center this entire thing. To do this, we simply just give the form a bit of height. So this box here, as we defined earlier, where is it, has a height of 400 pixels. So if we want to center this, we need to also have a height of 400 pixels as well. And now that we've given it a height of 400 pixels and centered it here, it'll look something like this. There we are. It's centered in the middle of that gray box, which is very nice. Alrighty. Now we can move on to the other box. So the other box, we want to display the Pokemon's image and a little bit about it. So as a placeholder, we're going to add this image tag, and it's simply just not going to have a source at the moment because we don't want anything displayed, but we'll have an ID so we can reference it in the JavaScript, and we'll give this an ID of Pokey image. We'll also display a little bit of information about it. So we'll have a paragraph with ID of Pokey info, and then nothing here. Otherwise, it will show up, but we only want it to show up once we have selected a Pokemon. So at the moment, we have this box and this button that don't work. Nothing happens. It just, hey, nothing happens. Back to this form, however, if I change the action to it and then give it a URL, now when I click this, doesn't really work, but it's fine because of the HTTPS, but you get the gist. It'll take me to somewhere new, but we'll get rid of it so we can stay on the same page. Okay, now let's give functionality to this text box and button. So to do that, we use JavaScript, script.js file. And to include that in our HTML document, we look at, we can go back here and find out how to do it. So to reference an HTML document, we just grab this and add it to our page. Add it to the bottom here, just how it works in this case, unfortunately. But you can also add it to the head or to the start of the body. But for this special case, we do it at the bottom. And now we can deal with the stuff in JavaScript. So we have some form selectors that we need to access. And if you guys remember to the very start of the workshop here at the top here, we talked about this document object model that holds all the documents in a tree so we can access them later in JavaScript. And that's what we'll be doing now. So there are a few things I want to access. Let me just bring up this here. We want to access the name that we have inputted, and we can do that with a const, so it doesn't change during our script running. And to access the document object model, we simply do document, and now we can use one of the get functions, such as get, and then we have element. That's what we want to do, and then you can get them by a few different things. So class name, name, tag name. Well, the one we'll go to is ID. And our Pokey name is saved under this ID. In the input here has an ID of Pokey name as well. Nice and common, useful name. We also want to get the form. This is because we want to know when we have submitted the form. And again, you get document, get element by, and we called it Pokey form with a capital F. A few other things we want to get is the image, because this is what we want to update. So this image down here, where it's currently empty, we want to update that later on down the track. So we're just going to get that as well. And that was Pokey image. The last thing is the info right underneath the image. So Pokey info equals document.get element by Pokey info. Alright, fantastic. If we wanted to, we could change it straight away, change some stuff straight away. So example here, there is nothing in this bit here. But in Pokey info, in JavaScript, we can change what's written in the HTML by getting the variable where the element is stored. So in this case, Pokey info, and then using dot inner HTML and assigning that a value, where we can update the DOM. So for example, if I write that hello and reload the page, there we go. Hello is updated, even though there's nothing written here, which is pretty neat. All right, now we get to the fun stuff of communicating with the API. So the API we'll be using is the Pokey API, and it tells you what to expect from the JSON file that will send back. So here the default one is ditto. So for ditto we get this JSON file that contains other objects, or it is an object that contains other objects. And here we can select stuff like abilities, the different forms it takes, stuff like games, held items, etc. But what we're most concerned about is just the photo. So a quick look around will show you that the photo is in this sprite section under official artwork. And then if we look at this link here, there we have the photo of Ditto that we want to display on our screen. So to do that, what we need to do is send a GET request to the API. So we have to set up we only want to do this once we hit submit. So in our form, we're going to add an event listener that listens for submit. And once it does, we want to do this get image function that we will write shortly. So we can do const get. We'll call this get Pokemon actually. It makes a bit more sense because we're getting the entire Pokemon JSON file. Get Pokemon, and it has this attribute E, which is the event, and then we can do stuff with it. So the first thing we'll do is we'll do this E dot prevent default, and what this does is simply means that the page will stay where it is. It won't go to a new page and refresh. Otherwise, our work will just go down the drain. To get from an API, we use this fetch function. Now, fetch is an asynchronous JavaScript function, meaning that the other code in the background will execute at the same time while this function is waiting. So we can do two things at once without halting the entire program. Otherwise, if it ran synchronously, like a normal JavaScript, it would wait here until we get that GET request, which can hold up the entire program, make it slow. So fetch, excuse me, fetch is an asynchronous JavaScript function. And where do we want to fetch from? Well, we have this lovely API, and it's giving us where the URL that we want to fetch from. So we're going to use that. And then Pokemon. And this is where we add in the Pokemon we want to search. So Pokey name. However, before we do this, secret hack in VS Code, by the way, is if you hold Control K C, it will just comment the code out for you. Pretty sick. If we check what the Pokey name is at the moment, where's our little? Here it is. If we go hey, you can see that it's literally the entire element that we have right now, which is not what we want. We don't want the entire element. We just want the value that we inputted. So to do that, we do the element dot value. So if I run it again, I now get hey instead of the entire element, which is what we'll use to call this API. To uncomment code, it's Control KU, which is pretty neat. And then Pokemon.value. There's a few issues with this, which we'll cover a bit later on. But for now, we'll just accept it as it is. And just make sure that our input is correct. So with asynchronous, we have these things called promises, which is the dot then, and what that is, it means it's an object that that knows it's going to hold a value, but waits for that value to come in, and the value that comes in is this JSON, and this is just how you do it. Don't have much. You can read into it in your own time, but I won't go through it now. Just know that this is how we get that JSON file. And then, literally, we have that JSON file in data as our parameter, and we do this arrow function. Which is where we can then process the stuff from that JSON file. So if we have a look at our API, wherever it is, we have to find the path that we care about. So the image that we want is in this front default. To get to that, though, we need to go to sprites, then other, dream world, and then finally front default, which is a bit of a trek, but just how it is. So to access and then we want to use that image to change our image, Pokey image. So to change our Pokey image, we go PokeyImage.source, and then we just set the source location. So in our case, it is it's in data, it's in sprites, it is then in other. Well, let me just double check here. Yep, other. Oh, sorry, official artwork, and then this front default, which this hyphen here makes it a little bit difficult because we can't do dot something hyphen something, but we'll work around it. So it's in data, sprites, other, and then after that comes this official artwork, which we need to do something special for. So because it's a hyphen, we have to consider that, and we have to use these square brackets and just then a string. So official artwork. But now we can use the dot again to go to the next object, and simply front default. And that's where our image that we want is currently held. Oh, sorry. Okay. The next thing we want to do is change the information that we have. So we'll just make it nice and simple, but we'll use the API. So let name equal, and the name is held under species and then name. So in our script, we'll grab the name to be data dot species dot name, and then and like we did earlier, our Pokey info can be changed using this inner HTML, and we'll write this is plus name. Hopefully that'll work. So if we write ditto here and send it off, this is ditto. Fantastic. As you can see, the image takes up a large portion of that box and just kicks the other bit off, even in a bigger mode. So we're back to our styling. In our CSS, we'll add a style to the image, just so we can restrict it. So we don't want it to take up the whole box, so we'll give it a width less than 400. So in this case, we'll do 300 pixels, and we'll give it a height of 300 pixels as well. So it's a nice square image. And if we save it, you can see it's changed, and now it fits inside the box really nicely. This Pokey info is a bit small, so we can add a style to that, make it a little bit bigger. So again with a hashtag, because we're accessing it by ID, info, and we'll give it a font size of 30 pixels. Sorry guys, someone just came into the CFC room. I'm back. Ash has added a little bit about the promises and the dot then in the chat if anyone wants to have a read. But we'll get back to where we were. We've made our Pokey info a bit bigger, so it's just a bit nicer to see. Alrighty. This is all well and good, but there's a few problems. As I mentioned earlier, input validation is very, very important. So for example, if I write ditto with a capital T instead, let me change the Pokemon actually. We write Chimchar. It doesn't work. It spits the dummy at us, and look, we have all these errors. And the reason for that is because when you call to the API, it wants the value in lowercase only. We can test that out in the API as well. Here, if we write, there's ditto, we write a capital at the start and submit it, it's broken. It doesn't like it. So we'll add our own little input validation. And to do this, we simply change this and make it a lowercase value. And to do this, we just go dot lowercase. And now that'll fix that. So we can go all capitals and it's fixed. So stuff like that is very important to consider when making forms, because like you saw, even if I spell it correctly but have one capital in the, where you expect a capital, it didn't work. So just make sure to keep that in mind. Now, another thing we can do is, this is a bit too user reliant. What if I type in hello, but I spell it completely wrong? Is that a Pokemon? No. And you can see it just spit the dummy at me and tell me I'm wrong. I'll just get rid of this console log because we don't need it anymore. So let's make it a little bit nicer for the user. To do this, we can go back to our Pokemon API, and we want it just to return the Pokemon. So if we have a play around here, we'll see that, hey, this returns us 100 objects of the Pokemon, and they have their names here. With a little bit of a play around, we can get the first 493, which is all your gen before the black and white generation, if anyone knows about that. And we'll just get the original up to Gen 4, for example. And we can use these to then make the form a bit more usable. So we'll just comment this out for now with your control case C. And in the index HTML, we'll do the same. We'll just get rid of this for a quick second. And we'll do something a little bit differently. So what we want is we're going to have a box that you can click and then search your Pokemon, just so we don't have to deal with input validation as much. It makes things a bit easier, and we don't have to check that that Pokemon exists before searching for it. To do that, we have these select elements, and we're just going to be selecting, that's it. We'll give this an ID of, keep it the same, just so we don't have to change our JavaScript, Pokey name, and then select. We'll give it the label, which is just the same as this one, so we'll copy that. Bang. Now we have this drop-down box with nothing in it at the moment, which is where your JavaScript comes into play. So what we can do is we can now grab all the Pokemon up to whatever we want and load them into here. So to do this, again, we have to fetch from the Pokemon API, except this time we're going to be fetching this instead. So go back here, plus, what is it? Sorry. And then this link So we're going to be sending a GET request to this link instead, and it's going to return us this JSON file with all 493 objects of the Pokemon that we want. Whoopsie daisies. Again, we have the promises that work like this. Don't worry too much about them. What is it? JSON, of course. If I can spell. And then we have our data. So this parameter is where the JSON file is stored again. Now we have our function. To load things into this box, what we want to do is we want to loop through all the objects that we got. So if we just see what we have now in the data, you'll see that when you click this button, go to the cons. Oh, never mind. Forgot that it doesn't work. That's fine. Oh yeah. So it should be somewhere. Never mind. Anyway, we have this data and it's in the form of this JSON file that we have here. And we want to access the names. So the names are stored in results, and then each object in results has a key name. To do this, we loop through the data using a for loop. Now, the type of for loop we want to use, if we go back to our workshop, down at the bottom here, go through our basic ones. So where is it? So for in deals with the indexes, but we don't really want to use the indexes. We want to use these objects that are in this results. So we use a for of because they will iterate through the data in the object. So here we have to let's say x be that results object that holds the 400 other objects, and we want to loop through that. To add options for our select, what we do is we get this Pokey name, because at the moment Pokey name is referring to this select. We get this Pokey name, and we give it some HTML stuff. And what we do is we add to the current plus give this new one. And what you need to write to do those selections is, if you first have the quotation marks, then you have option, the value, and equals. We want to add in what the value is. So in this case, it would be x.name, because that will access the data results and the name of each one. We'll have to have a plus here because we're dealing with concatenation. A plus again. Then we have the closing of the first tag. And then we have the same thing again. X name. And finally, once again, we have to just close it off. Oops. Close tag. Just making sure that's all correct. Yep. So now when we load this page, what have I done wrong here? Just checking. if there's anything I've stuffed up. It should have them all. Let me. Oh, right, obviously. Not inner HTML. That should work, but it doesn't. Okay, I'm just gonna copy what I have stored here previously and put that in. I'll go through it. I've done things a little bit differently here, which I was going to go to the next step. But anyway, we add these options to the Pokey name with a value of the X name. And then this is just to make it look a bit nicer, but we'll get to that in a sec. And then that should work. Unless I've done the wrong for loop. Well. I see. We're accessing the wrong API. And now, there we go. That was a bit of a scare. Sorry, I just had the URL be incorrect. But yeah, now we have added all the names to our selector. And now we can select all of the names, which is in order, which is very nice. What I have here, as you can see, is just to make it look nicer. So if I got rid of this, if it wants to work, and not. If I just got rid of that and had the plus back in to make it work, you'll see that they're all in lowercase, which doesn't look very nice. So what we'll do for that is we will select the first letter, which is at char 0, and we'll make it uppercase by going to uppercase. Make sure to add the quotation marks. And then we have to add the rest of it, which is your x.name, and there's a special function slice, and it'll slice 1 will give me the string from index 1 to the end, and this just makes everything capitalized and makes it look a bit nicer. I'm not sure why I got rid of this actually. Okay. Okay. And now we have a list instead. And we can press the letters and go to different things, but here it just makes a lot easier for us instead of having to do the input validation. That is about all, guys, that I have. If you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to shoot me. But this is our little Pokedex that we've created that allows you to select, or find and select the Pokemon you want, and it'll display it to you. Just while we're here, we'll fix this up so it looks a bit nicer. And again, that's the same. We'll just take this bit here. I'll go through it actually. So we have the name, but we want the first one to be a capital. So we go char at 0, and we make it uppercase to uppercase, plus the rest of the name from 1, and then we'll just add a full stop or an exclamation mark to make it exciting. And here is our Pokedex. And I forgot to include the brackets again. Very nice, very nice. Yeah, that is the introduction to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I hope the tutorial wasn't too fast and that you guys have managed to follow along. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, that's the tutorial done. Hope you guys learned something today.
Cool. Thanks, Phil. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed again. Hope you learned something.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for attending. Hope it wasn't too fast. Let me know if I could do anything better as well. It was my